Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in again today for my LinkedIn Live Practical Inclusion. This is, as I've said before, a really exciting thing for me that we get to have some kind of informal but practical conversations around how we create inclusion in our workplaces, sporting clubs, schools, communities, and homes. Today, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional land owners of the lands on which all of you gather on today, as well as for myself, it's the Wadawurrung people, and for my guest today, Rebecca Hunt, it's the Wurundjeri people. And pay my respect to their elders past, present and future, and of course any Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people that are watching in today, whether it's live or through the replay. Rebecca, welcome to this LinkedIn Live. I wanted to, before we launch into learning a bit about you, I wanted to quickly get your thoughts around acknowledgements to countries. In the diversity inclusion work that I do, I'm quite often asked by people about acknowledgements to country and how they see value in that. Obviously, I can't answer that question, but I'd love for you to give us your thoughts about acknowledgements and how people make them meaningful.
I think, hi, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is the purpose of an acknowledgement is to show respect to traditional owners of the country. And I think it's also, traditionally, it's something that we've always had in culture. You know, you wouldn't just lob onto someone else's land, you'd actually be welcomed when you go to someone else's country. So being on someone else's country and just acknowledging that that's where you are, it's really about respect. And I don't know the synonym for acknowledge. So it's really literally about acknowledging this is where I am and I respect you and thank you for having me here. I find it interesting. There's, you know, generic acknowledgements of country which are completely acceptable. You know, if you don't know the land that you're on, you can always say the traditional owners of the land. But it is, you know, really great if you can go to your local council or co-op or ask an elder to get some more information. But I always like in my acknowledgements, and I'll do one for you now, and I'll demonstrate how you can sort of personalise and individualise them. So I'd like to acknowledge that both of us are broadcasting from traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people where I am and the Wadawurrung people where you are, and pay respects to ancestors, elders past, present and future. I'd also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to all of the people that have come before me and paved a way so that I can stand where I am today as a queer woman, as an Aboriginal woman, and as a human being, most importantly, and have a voice. And I acknowledge the strong leadership in those areas, such as, you know, sorry, I've just had a complete blank. So my demonstration of personalising an acknowledgement has not gone well. This is what happens when you're nervous. There are ways, though, that you can contextualise an acknowledgement depending on where you are and what you're wanting to acknowledge. I also like to say I'd like to extend my respects to all non-Aboriginal people present who are allies and walk with us. I like to add that as well, and I always like to add that I pay my respects to elders past, present and future, because it acknowledges that we have a future as Aboriginal people.
Yeah. Well, I just think despite your nerves, Beck, you've just kind of probably given enough value in those couple of minutes for this LinkedIn Live than what's required, because that's so much for people to take and absorb. And I think that's a nice little, this will be recorded and people can replay, and it's something that they can use within their organisations, I think, to kind of put more meaning into those acknowledgements. Yep. So thank you. And thank you for going with me on that, even though I haven't yet given you a chance to tell us who you are. Beck and I were laughing beforehand that, you know, the promotional material for this session, Beck was wearing the same T-shirt that she has on now. I think I see absolutely no problem with that. We're in isolation and you can wear whatever the hell you want.
I just wanted people to know that between taking that photo and today, there has been definitely had a shower. Just over here in my neck of the woods, pictures are falling off the wall. So, great.
Crazy things in lockdown. So tell us, who are you? But also, why do you do what work do you do, and why do you do it? What motivates you?
So, my role at VACCHO is Diversity and Inclusivity Program Manager, LGBTQIA+ specific. The role was created a year ago. However, unfortunately, due to COVID, it was put on hold. Because, as you know, the funding situation right now, everything is going to COVID response, which it absolutely needs to. Unfortunately, it means that initiatives that you've worked so hard to bring to life, they end up being put on the back burner. And in my experience, quite often those initiatives are LGBTQIA+ initiatives or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander initiatives sometimes, depending on the environment. And I at this stage, the role's still relatively new within the organisation. So one of my main focuses is ensuring that VACCHO is a safe and inclusive working space for all LGBTQIA+ people, regardless of race. And in doing that, I'm hoping to achieve, I will achieve Rainbow Tick accreditation for the organisation. I do the work that I do, though, because as an Aboriginal woman, as a queer woman, I live in that intersecting space every day. So I know that I know the challenges to a certain degree, because my experiences would be very different from my darker skinned brothers and sisters, Aboriginal people. Experiences would be quite different. I have what is referred to as passing privilege. That's how I refer to it. So I don't quite look Aboriginal, but I could, and so therefore I could say that I'm not. I could deny if I wanted to, which is just a result of colonisation and neo-colonisation, actually. So I work in this space because I'm really passionate about not just improving outcomes, but improving lives, because the circle of people that I move amongst are all intersectional people who are all have one thing that we have in common is a sense of isolation and a sense of invisibility.
Yeah, I'd love you to expand on that, because we spoke a little bit about this last time you and I chatted. You talked about some of the how you'd realised that perhaps there were some similarities with your experience and the experience of trans people. Can you expand on that?
Okay, so I speak when I'm. I just want to clarify that I'm only speaking on my personal experience. I'm not speaking on behalf of all Aboriginal people at all. For me, I see similarities in the experiences of Aboriginal people and the experiences of trans and transgender diverse. I don't know if I've said that right. Trans and gender diverse people, in the sense that quite often we don't necessarily fit the physical description or the physical assumption of what we're supposed to look like. So our identities are taken away from us and thrown back at us in a sense of, well, no, are you sure you're Aboriginal? What part Aboriginal? And it's the same from my observation, because I'm not a trans person, so I wouldn't speak on behalf of at all. But from my observation, I see that it can be the same in the sense that trans people will quite often have their identities taken away and thrust back on them with, well, you don't fit my expectation of what a woman or a man or etc. should look like, so therefore you're not, because biology tells us this. In our case, in the case of Aboriginal people, particularly for those of us who are fair-skinned, you know, history shows us that there was evidence where they could, they wanted to breed out the Aboriginality within 3 generations. So I see similarities in the sense that our identities are always, thanks Siri, no one asked you, but our identities seem to be up for public discussion, for people to dissect, and they also seem to be, there isn't enough self-determination in allowing someone their identity when you're telling them how they should be identifying. So that's the biggest similarity I see between trans and gender diverse people and Aboriginal people. That and the fact that you are, in some way, shape or form, constantly having to come out. I mean, even as gay people, we have to come out whenever when that post went up on Facebook and you put one up on LinkedIn, I'm talking about the post that my work put up, I just went, oh my gosh, everyone's going to see that, and I'm essentially coming out again. And my partner said, why are you even worried? I said, I'm not, but it just bothers me that that's what happens.
Yeah.
You're constantly having to come out and then face the threat of whatever negativity might come with.
Yeah. And that's perhaps something that straight people maybe don't fully understand is, I think people are coming to terms with the fact that as queer you need to come out on a regular basis, but not perhaps that sense of fear and insecurity that moment brings each time. And it doesn't seem to matter how conditioned you are, or how much time has passed or how many times you've done it, you're still always unsure how that's going to be received.
Yeah, and in my experience, I go through that as an Aboriginal woman. If I'm out somewhere in public and someone asks what nationality I am, I have to very quickly gauge, is it safe for me to answer honestly here, or do I just go with, I'm Maori because that's how I present?
Right, yeah.
Does that make sense? And so there, when you have to look at it, you can see all the correlation.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, what we're talking about is either people who are in minorities or who are marginalised, even to a degree where our very identities become, you know, the topic of public conversation, or, you know, other people get a chance to determine what they are. And I'm not here for that. I didn't come here for that.
Yeah. No, it's you've put that so eloquently, and I think that the point that really is standing out for me too, and it often is something that I deal with when I'm delivering LGBTI awareness training, is around that concept of self-determination, and that people do have the right to that, and it's not actually your job to sort out in your head whether their identity is legitimate or not. It's your job to make sure that their experience and their way in the world is one of inclusion and belonging. That's your responsibility as somebody who's hearing that story.
Yep.
Or receiving that coming out story, or whatever it may be.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I want to talk about something. Just before we do, I just want to define, for those who are watching who aren't perhaps familiar with the term intersectionality, it's a core topic of what we're talking about today, and it is the fact that as humans we have various elements of our identity that intersect and create the lived experience that we have in the world. And so it's really important whenever we're doing diversity and inclusion work to recognise that people aren't just one thing. So somebody's not just queer. There are other elements of their identity that affects the way they're accepted and respected, and their experiences that they have in certain settings. Would that be a good definition, Beck, that you're comfortable with?
Absolutely. And there was a question that you said that you were going to ask me, And I'm waiting for that one because I know that it's going to tie in with what you've just said. So either that was a brilliant segue.
It was a segue.
Okay, excellent. So, do you want to ask the question, or should I just go on?
Ask the question and then you can answer it. So often, and I only heard this just this week, so this is not something that is in the past. This is something that is still presented as a legitimate idea, and for some people it is legitimate. I'm not saying we're right or wrong here, but the statement is, if we get it right for women when we're doing our diversity and inclusion work or during our gender equity work, we'll get it right for everyone. And my question is that a valid statement or is that flawed?
In my professional opinion, and I say professional because I have a life of experiences to back this up, no, absolutely it's not valid. I mean, if you look at a workplace where they've considered gender equity or gender equality, for example, gender equality works really well for a cisgendered white woman who is wanting to climb the corporate ladder, but it doesn't work for a Black queer woman or a woman with disability or a transgendered woman or a non-binary person. It doesn't work for just saying if we address issues for women, then it's going to fix everything for everyone. It won't work that way because of intersectionality. So, you may be, as a say for example, I'm going to use an Aboriginal woman, for example, an Aboriginal woman working at a workplace where they've introduced gender equality may have more of a chance to climb the corporate ladder, for example, except that they're still going to face racism. So they're still going to have that barrier in their way. Someone who is, say, who is able-bodied, for example, is going to have more of a chance in a workplace that is set up for accessibility for them than a person who is living with a disability and is working somewhere where it's not accessible or inclusive for themselves. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely does. And yes, I'm exactly the same and believe the exact same. And we see that, right? We see organisations that have done gender equality really well, and they might have got to a stage where it is a balanced executive or board, but we know that not only typically are most of those women white and straight and without disability, but quite often they also share very similar characteristics to the men who are on those boards as well, which to me indicates what we're doing is actually we're not changing the system. We're just slightly opening the gates a little bit to let a certain type of person through, but we haven't really done our work around inclusion.
I think I would even go as far to say that in some cases we're not changing the system. If anything, we're just dressing it up to look even prettier. But, that saying, you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. It still exists. So we need real and effective change. And to do that, it has to be systemic. That's where the change needs to occur, because we're talking about systemic issues that they don't end at the workplace. They go into society, they go into government, and they just keep going and going. And I'm passionate about the work that I do in the sense of diversity and inclusivity, because I want my nieces to grow up in a world where it doesn't matter if they come out or not, because it's irrelevant. The gender of the person that you're having intimate relationship with is completely irrelevant. Can you do your job? Yes, you can. Well, and are you a good person? Those types of shifting the focus onto that instead of, there's such a big focus on identity, but I feel like the focus isn't necessarily positive. It's almost like a negative focus in the sense of picking apart each other's identities and then categorizing everyone into boxes, and then they're the expectations in which you need to live by, which doesn't work for everyone.
No, and it is quite it is a difficult thing for organisations to do. And I think the trouble sometimes comes from the fact that, yes, we still need to recognise that there are nuances, and that there is specific work that needs to be done for certain groups of people, and how organisations frame that in a way that makes sense for them. And so we still see so many orgs with separate plans. They have an LGBTI inclusion plan, a cultural diversity plan, and a RAP perhaps, and a disability inclusion plan, which there's value in the actions that sit within those plans. I think for me that the key to that is making sure that each one of those individual plans also has an intersectional lens placed over it. And that's how you can start to break it down and perhaps put them in an overarching, umbrella or structure that is about change in the system. But I'd be interested in your thoughts around what workplaces could be doing to really practically create that change that you're talking about.
I think first and foremost, recognising that intersectionality exists is a big one, because if you're going to look at gender equality, then you also need to look at, I suppose, I don't like saying these words, but for want of a better term, race equality. You need to look at the cultural safety of your organisation in smaller sections, but then also as a whole. And the biggest thing for me is, and interestingly, I actually wrote an article for the Guardian a couple of years ago around reconciliation plans, because my whole purpose was, it's great if they look great and they have great words in them, but are they meaningful, or are they just tokenistic? So the biggest thing for me that organisations can do is have true leadership, really wanting to champion these issues and live and breathe it, rather than just putting it on paper and essentially it can become a tokenistic gesture. So it needs to happen at every level. That's why I was talking about, it doesn't just finish at your work, because you need your CEO, you need your board, you need all those people behind it for inclusivity to actually work across the organisation, and that depends, and that's regardless of what lens you're putting on it.
Yep, it is everybody's responsibility, and it's about organisations recognising that and actually ensuring that everybody in the organisation understands and is acting inclusively. I like it. Now, we've only got a little bit of time left, and I really did want to talk about Black Lives Matter.
Yep.
And particularly what I'd love you to kind of talk to a bit is around, I guess, the why Australians need to be invested and I guess showing as much interest as what we're seeing happening in the US here on our own soil. So if you could maybe talk to that a little bit for us.
So in my opinion, Aboriginal people have been saying Black Lives Matter since 1788. We've been saying it for years and years and years. The Black Lives Matter movement isn't new to me. I know that a few years ago, we had some delegates from the United States come to Australia to have conversations with Aboriginal elders regarding the Black Lives Matter movement. When you look at, say, inclusivity, for example, you sorry, I'm trying to articulate this very concisely because I know we have a small amount of time. So, for example, in the workplace, just taking a policy and changing it from he or she to they is a huge step towards inclusivity in the workplace for LGBTQIA plus people. Taking Australia Day and moving it to a day that makes it more inclusive of Aboriginal people is a huge step in inclusivity for Aboriginal people. It's evident that Black lives actually do matter. When you have situations where, for example, we had someone in the community I don't feel comfortable saying their name. They're now deceased, but someone in the community was actually, no, I should. So Tanya Day, Auntie Tanya Day was a victim of police brutality, and there was no recompense for that. So when you deal with Aboriginal people, you're dealing with trauma, and it's because since 1788 we've been told our lives don't matter. I mean, there's legislation that will back that up. We had to have a referendum in 1967 to decide that we could change 2 laws in the Constitution that specifically applied to Aboriginal people, and 90.77% of Australians voted yes to change that. But the fact that we even had to have a referendum for it is ludicrous. Just like we had to have a plebiscite to determine that we could marry our same-sex partners. Australia had to vote on it. Like I find it interesting that we're voting on these things that we shouldn't have to vote on. So for me, it's not just Black Lives Matter, it's also Black Queer Lives Matter. It's also Queer Lives Matter. But I'm definitely not going to go down the track of All Lives Matter, because they will once they actually do. All lives will matter once Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And we see effective change in systems to demonstrate that. That's honestly what I believe. And Australia needs to get behind it, because we can't have a holistic diversity and inclusivity framework for the country at all if we're not inclusive of everyone, including First Nations or First Peoples of Australia, who, you know, if you're going to acknowledge country, then you also need to acknowledge that we matter.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's tokenistic.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And I think a lot of people over this time, a lot of white Australians over this time have started to do some things, I think, that perhaps they hadn't done before, which is, a great thing to come out of such tragedy. But as you say, this is not new. And it's kind of, this is what we should be doing or should have done years ago. And so the emphasis has to be there to really, for us to play our role and play our part and not sit by and be spectators, I think. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that and for the advocacy that you do in that space. And that, that you are willing to share those stories and to educate those of us who do need it, because I know that can be a tiring experience. At times, probably most of the time.
I did do it professionally for 7 years, so I can tell you it is a tiring experience, but it's also really important, because one thing that's come out of Black Lives Matter becoming a trending movement is that Australians have realised that they know very little about Aboriginal people, and it's coming to the forefront more and more. Australians are realising I don't know anything. I wasn't taught anything, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can 100% relate to that, because that's definitely my case as well.
Yeah.
Right. We need to wrap up there.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming and having this conversation, just so incredibly valuable. And please, everybody who's watching live and on the replay, share this around. There's some incredible nuggets in there for us all and for all organisations to really jump on and get behind. I will be on again next Tuesday. The guest is still up in the air, so I will be communicating that nearer to the end of the week. So join us again, or join me again next Tuesday at noon as we tackle another one of these topics. And please get in contact if you'd like to come on yourself, or if you have a topic that you'd like me to cover. That'd be fantastic. Just a little plug, next Monday, some of you were on watching with me with Joe Bangles last week, our little free taster program for our Linked Out program, which is around LGBTIQA plus inclusion in regional Australia. We have our free session on Monday as part of the Geelong Small Business Festival, and I'll put some information in the links that you can jump on and register for that if you're interested. So enjoy the rest of your day, and please go away and think about what Beck said and what we can learn from it and what types of things we can actually do to create more inclusion. Catch you later. Thanks, Beck.